Welcome to Amidon Planet. I'm your host, Joel Amidon. Thank you for joining me on this never-ending quest to learn how to teach better. Today on episode 88 of the podcast is a blast from the Amidon Planet past. My mentor and friend of over 20 years, Dr. Gary Williams, talent director at Robert Half Management Resources, comes back to Amidon Planet to share his insight and energy as we discuss the book, The Ride of a Lifetime, Lessons Learned from 15 Years as CEO of the Walt Disney Company by Robert Iger. Now, Robert Iger recently returned to being CEO after about a year away. And just like can't keep Bob Iger away, we can't keep Gary Williams away. It's awesome to have him back, have him talk, share again, like I said before, his energy and his insight into this book. Hey, Gary, have you ever read this book? He's like, I haven't. Let me pick it out. He picked it up. And he sent me this awesome text message that I'm going to share within our episode. And I was like, that is it. That's why we got to have Gary on to talk about this book. And just good to talk to Gary. It's always good to talk to Gary. So we're going to be talking about the book, The Ride of a Lifetime, Lessons Learned from 15 Years as CEO of the Walt Disney Company. Again, by Robert Iger, Bob Iger, we might call him. As always, just know that we will not be able to communicate the whole value of the book. And even if we did, it would be from our perspective. And even though Gary and I give some great perspective, it's still ours. So in other words, if you like what you hear, get the book for yourself. Right now, you can go to bookshop.org, which is a website committed to helping local independent bookstores thrive in the age of e-commerce. You can go and you can find that link. You can actually find that link in our show notes at amidonplanet.com/episode 88. And by using that link, you can purchase the book and not only support local booksellers, but also the production costs of the Amidon Planet podcast. Or better yet, you can also head down to your local bookseller and pick up a copy. It's a good one. All right, so I'm not going to delay anymore. Here's my conversation with Dr. Gary Williams. Gary, you're back on Amidon Planet.
How are you? Oh my gosh, I am better than I should be, and just loving life, and been through a lot. Since we last spoke, it's been yes. Since we were last on this podcast, I've definitely gone through a lot of different transitions professionally and personally. But I'm in a wonderful place, and even though I'm no longer in higher education, I still feel like an educator every day in the job that I'm doing, and take an educator's approach to corporate America. And it's been very well received, and I've been very fortunate. So. Yeah.
Well, the word Wednesdays have just been popping off.
That's right. If you are not paying attention to me on LinkedIn, yes, I have a Wednesday word, and we'll always try to tie it into something related to the work that we do with Robert Half in terms of recruiting and then helping serve clients. And I've had a couple fun ones, but I've also had ones that are serious in nature. Yeah. And I'm really trying to, I think, what's interesting is the landscape continues to just absolutely change in lightning pace, right? And one of the things that we're finding is that, as quickly as we get used to, like in the recruiting world, Robert Half world, they used to just be pounding the phones. Like, you got to pound the phones, you got to call, you got to call. Then it became more, okay, you got to get on, you got to email people, and you got to do this. And then it was, well, you got to get on social media. And now it's like, actually, don't put any words in there. Just put images, because people like to just hear you. So it's just been fascinating, and actually that evolution is very similar to the book that you asked me to read, which, hey,
nice
let's transition, baby. Like, when we talk about The Ride of a Lifetime by Bob Iger, I think that there are so many, it's interesting because I wonder, like, seeing some things that are going on today and his return to the company is interesting, because now I'm now paying attention to it a little different. Admittedly, was a complete Disney freak for a long time.
Well, that's what I was wondering too. Like, we'll back up a little bit. So, like, we're talking about Bob Iger's book. We're talking about the CEO of Disney.
Yeah.
And so, like, and that was my first, like, are you, like, I was pretty sure you're a Disney guy.
Oh, Totally, I was. I mean, all the way through. Now once my oldest is 19, my daughters are 19 and 16, so we're a little past that now. Now they're the universal generation, but I cannot make this up, Joel. Like we literally we used to have a better tie to Disney, but now that we are in a vacation group that still has their home base in Orlando, and in fact, we're going again. We've gone every year pretty much I've been to a Disney park, with the exception of the pandemic, probably every year for the last 18 or 19 years.
Yeah.
And there was always something about Disney, and part of it was its reputation of really strong customer service. But I mean, many of you know, like, it's really it went through a rough transition here, and a lot of those things that they believed in, were really challenged. And I noticed the challenges in terms of a reduction of service, increasing of pricing, and just this tension, but we're going again in May. I typically, I still go. I love the new Hollywood Studios, the Star Wars stuff in there, because Star Wars geek generation, right. But now I'm starting to view it from a different lens, because we have a friend of ours that a former GA of mine, and her daughter are going to actually come down with us for a period of time, and now we're going to take her daughter to see Disney. So it'll be so fun to see Disney from a completely different lens.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So we just went over the Thanksgiving week of Thanksgiving, basically spent Thanksgiving at Disney, and just and it was a bunch of different families or all together, like having this experience, and over and over, again, like you're saying, seeing it from different people's perspectives, because we had very young kids, and they're seeing Mickey walking around, like, oh my God, there's Mickey, and versus like riding roller coasters with my kids, and and knowing that they're Disney level, which means they're like bordering PG-13, but a lot of times like still PG. So it's like, yay, rocking. I'm not going to be scared or wet myself or whatever.
Yeah. That's awesome.
But like having that experience and being like, they do things right. And I just remember like one time I was like in the line for the Slinky Dog roller coaster.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's at Hollywood Studios.
That new part back there.
And I saw a sticker. It was the dollar sticker, or like the price sticker on a box. Like, so like the structure around that roller coaster is like toys. It's like, it's a box for like, this is like a Tinker Toy, is like instead of just having a pole, it's a Tinker Toy pole. And like across, like you're getting in line to get on the roller coaster, and across the way there's like a, I don't know, like Twister box or something like that, is like the wall.
Yeah.
And then you see on there's like a sticker. It says 1996 or something like that. But whatever. And then there's like a date, and it's like but it's like a price sticker. And I'm like, I was just curious. I'm like, that seems like something. So I looked it up. When did Toy Story come out? And the price sticker reflected the date that Toy Story was released in theaters. And it was like,
it's uncanny,
the attention to detail.
Yes. And it's almost scary. Like, in fact, you talk about attention to detail, and one of the very first themes that emerge in the book from Iger is with his relationship with Roone Arledge, his first kind of mentor in television, and
the legend, Roone Arledge.
Yes. And they talk about the relentless pursuit of perfection. And that is a theme from the first part of this book that really resonated with me, because I think there's a misconception with perfectionism. Like, there's perfectionists, there's perfectionism, and then there's the pursuit of perfection. And what I love about that phrase is the word pursuit, because that's the key word.
That is the key.
Because I am a firm believer that you would be very naive if you truly thought we could be perfect. We can't be. Like, and we could save our thoughts for another podcast in terms of, that that quest of perfection. But for me, it even evolved further when he introduced me to the word shokunin. And the word means the endless pursuit of perfection for some greater good. And that's when the light bulb went on for me. Because like, I mean, and I don't remember if the listeners remember, my background is I have a PhD in leadership and I've always been an advocate. And for me, a very foundational scholar is Maccabee, and Maccabee talks about the qualities of great leaders, and one of the concepts is in a book that he talks about the productive narcissist. And again, it's a play on a word that most of us view in a negative light, narcissistic, right? Mm-hmm. But true narcissism, like, is the reflection or belief in oneself. And so he talks about that separation between productive narcissists who are believing in self and doing good works, and then the unproductive one, which are leaders that we've seen throughout our lives who, fall into scandal or have issues and are really using people for their own greater accomplishment. And so when Iger brought these concepts up, I totally was like, oh my gosh, like what if as a teacher and as a even as a student of education or of teaching, we were constantly challenging ourselves, or we're in an environment where we were pursuing every day to try to be better than we were the day before, and not worry about so much the long game sometimes, but just really focusing for our own growth and development. Like, how could I be better for my students today than I was yesterday? And being okay knowing I may have failed yesterday. Like, that could have been a bad day.
Yeah.
But today I get a new start, right? Or in the educational world, often we think about a new semester or a new year. And even though we have these memories of who we were a year ago, more often than not, the people that were now directly in front of us have no idea who we were. They hear about you, and from a reputation standpoint, but they truly have no idea who you are. I mean, talk to me a little bit, but like when you walk in for a new semester, like, how do you approach that? You know what I mean? Like, you may have a couple students that had you before, but the vast majority of them, this is a brand. Yes, it may have been the 20th time you've taught a semester of calculus to somebody, or teaching calculus to somebody, but for them, it's like it's their first time.
Yeah.
Do you think about that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So like thinking about like that first introduction, because a lot of time, sometimes you think like, well, they've read the reviews of the class, and so
right.
And like they know that this is but like a lot of times it's like, this class, I have to take this class. This class fits my schedule. That's why we're in Dr. Amadon's section of, EDC I-353 for right now. But that's it. And like, there's nothing beyond that. So yeah, when you're thinking about every single day and thinking about, it's like, what are those orientation? This goes to another book that I want to read by Horst Schulze, from the Ritz-Carlton. He talks about those first moments that someone who is, and he says it, and this will be another book that I'm going to do on the podcast, but talks about not hiring people, but selecting people. Like, you haven't been hired, you've been selected. And so like, and talks about how do you start? And so been really thinking about that. And also too, kind of with connected to this book, there's a book called Be Our Guest, which is all about Disney's, customer service kind of philosophy and everything. And just how do you handle that because it's weird with teaching, because like I'm teaching teachers, so I'm teaching students who are going to in the future have students. And so like thinking about the modeling and thinking about that, and like every time, like you talk about the roulette, like, I just started a semester. We're like a few weeks in, and I'm like already thinking about how am I going to start the next one because I didn't do it as well as I wanted to. And it's like, it's kind of you're pointing to a story where Iger was talking about the movie Euro Dreams of Sushi, and like how the main character in that documentary is like just trying to, how old is he? He's like, he's in his late 80s during the movie, and he's like still trying to perfect the rice that goes into the sushi. And he's like, and everyone's like, it's pretty darn good.
Can you move on to something else?
Exactly. But like thinking about that from a teaching perspective, it's kind of maddening. Like when I first started teaching, or first even thought about teaching, I'm like, man, I wouldn't want to be the person that has to teach the same class over and over again. How boring. But actually, I did that a lot where I taught the same class over and over. And it was like, okay, that went this way. And now thinking about the next class, and like, I've got a chance to make some adjustments and to keep moving. So like, there's like these large scale adjustments, there's these small scale adjustments. And it's like this, and when I start the podcast, I talk about, thank you for joining me on this journey of of this never ending quest to learn how to teach better. Cause that's what we're trying to do. Right. And like, thinking about, Iger's in this book is, his autobiography basically, but with leadership lessons within it. And he's talking about this, this story and how it's this continuous evolution through these different jobs and positions to, ultimately ending up being the CEO of Disney. And it's like these, I would think he's the same way. He's still trying to learn and grow and how to do this thing better. And the lessons contained within it. I thought there's lots there.
And actually, Joel, that is precisely he talks in the book, and this is also like a Jim Collins reference to inflection point. He talks about this inflection point that occurs, right? So, Rune was kind of a tyrant, right? Like he was really on them and done, really. And so, but it very specifically, Iger talks about a moment in time where he has to make a decision. Am I just going to replicate what I saw? Or am I going to go forward? In fact, one of the quotes or moments he has with Rune made me chuckle because I could see it. I could see the positive and the negative of this quote, which was, Rune asked him, "Hey, how are things going?" And we often, almost always, I can't even. I don't think I could count the number of times I've said something like, I'm just trying to keep my head above water.
This is in the bathroom. This is a bathroom exchange. Yeah.
Yeah. He's like, I'm just trying to keep my head above water. And deadpan, Rune just looks at him and is just like, well, you might need to get a bigger snorkel.
Yeah.
And I can totally imagine that moment being beyond infuriating, but yet at the same token, also kind of like, you're right. I could sit here and I guarantee we all in education have gone through this. You're right. I wish we had more money. I wish we had better desks. I wish we had better resources. But you know what? I just got to find a way to get a bit, I just got to find a way to get a longer snorkel.
Yeah.
As opposed to complaining about being underwater. And there is, and this ties into what I think is probably the quintessential concept that I noticed in Iger, which is,
Can I quote you? I'm going to quote you. You sent me a text. And I think it's right here. Are we talking both and? We are. Can I quote you?
You can.
Because I thought you said it brilliantly.
Well, good, because I don't remember what I said.
All right. So I copied and pasted in this document. So here we go. From Dr. Gary Williams. The main theme for me is a concept a former boss had, which was referred to as both and. What Iger does is tries to get both operational success and put people first. So many examples throughout his book that describe how he had to manage situations using a dualistic approach versus your typical straight approach that is contingent on the lens of the leader. Iger reinforces through his stories and examples that leading through the lens of the follower help both him and them, builds trust, and ultimately drive success long term. Unquote.
I mean, whoever said that.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm
really
telling
good.
you. Yeah. I can't take full credit for the concept. It was a former a boss of mine who coined that, and would always challenge us in a meeting, because we would be sitting around, and it would always feel like, for each of us in our lens, it would be like, well, we need this, and then someone else would say, yes, but we need this, and then we need this, and he would say, well, what if we needed both? And we often do struggle with that. But like, let me give you just a couple examples of what I meant by this. Like, for instance, there is often a philosophy in leadership and in management, even on the corporate, or mainly on the corporate side, but probably often in administration, that in your first 100 days, you're supposed to take this, very kind of like backseat approach, and, get in all, take in all that you see,
the landscape,
and
yes.
Get the landscape right. Well, in one of my educational administrative forays, I started on day -1, basically being told, you need to fire this person. This is what's going wrong with this. We're having a problem over here. And so, like, literally on -day 1, I walked in on day 1 and had to do both vision casting and make decisions.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that it unfortunately impacted my ability to garner trust, because I was almost forced into a situation environmentally where it was hard to take a step back. And so I approached meetings with some of these people on my staff from a negative lens of, because I'm trying to fit in with the culture of administration. They're telling me this should have happened, but it didn't happen, and so it needs to happen. And now I'm immediately going and approaching this. And so often during that course of time, and then in reflecting back, I think about the failures that I had as an administrator, because I could have approached it so much differently. I'm still not telling you that in your first 100 days, you shouldn't have to make decisions, because that's the reality of leadership. You're not in there for just, looking at the landscape. Anyone can do that. They brought you in because they know you need to make changes as an administrator, but it's how you're going to make those changes. And that's where Iger trumps me, in terms of he approached those situations dualistically and really tried hard to come to this place where, yes, we need to make this operational change, but we're going to do it from a lens of respect. And that was one of the words he used often, which was honesty and respect.
Yeah. So, and when you texted me that quote, or texted me that message that I just read, when I saw that made me think of, like, okay, one, see when Gary's available to talk about the book, and two, like a couple of like the both end things that just a couple of them that I was thinking of that apply to the classroom, that we set up these like false dichotomies, right? So like I can work, so like, especially when No Child came about, and like they said, we need to measure math and science achievement. And so what people did, like, oh, we can only focus in on math and English language arts. And so we can only focus on that. That's the only thing that and like, versus like, thinking about a well-rounded education, and thinking about, and also too addressing these issues of equity and diversity in the classroom. Like one of my, mentors, Gloria Ladson-Billings, talked about this idea of culture relevant pedagogy. Says academic achievement is just one of the, 3 things that you would do in culture relevant pedagogy. You're talking about academic achievement. You're talking about cultural competence. You're talking about sociopolitical political consciousness, and those things together is what makes up that successful pedagogy. And so it's like this both and is like, it doesn't have to be either or, right? This both and also too,
Precisely.
like this idea also within that quote, you talk about teaching through the lens of the learner, right? I'm still the teacher. This was leading through the lens of those being led, right? So I was thinking about teaching through the lens of the learner is like, I still have to act as the teacher, right? But I still have to have empathy for those that I'm teaching and thinking about it from their perspective. So it's like holding both of those within your, within your mind as you are in the act of teaching. That's about, and so like, I think that's what Iger is talking about here is like over and over again, he's got to answer to board of directors, and they're looking at one measure, what is the stock price, and that's it. And thinking about academic achievement, same thing there with these high stakes tests and whatnot. Like there's something that people are paying attention to, but at the same time, he's like, but you still have to do what's right. Like you still have to do what's right. You still have to have empathy. You still have to, like, when he talks about towards the beginning of the book, one of the just a day that is, I don't even understand how he went through it with like opening up Disney in Shanghai,
in China, and then hearing
about
in
Orlando, and like all these
the
things,
alligator incident.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And like all these things he's handling at the same time. It was just like within a 24-hour period. And it was just like still having empathy, still knowing that there are these, but still making decisions that are in line with what his beliefs are, what he wants the integrity, the honesty, the respect, but still also making sure like you still have to keep the doors open and running as well. So,
well, I mean, it is unbelievably timely. Yesterday, I just read an article that Disney is cutting jobs, while at the same token increasing some benefits for some of the shareholders. And the way the article spun, it felt like they were like, oh, so we're going to do this, but then you're going to cut employees. And, and then when you read into the article, you notice that he's making cuts in a lot of places. It just happens to also be in staffing, which is unfortunately for absolutely every organization in the country, in the world. What is your number one cost? It's people, right? I mean, it is. I mean, and to only take a 3% cut of that workforce, and yet I think it was in marketing, he slashed the marketing budget by like 50 or 60% or something like that, right? Like, so it's like this, it felt like, I was like, oh, and yet he wanted to reward people who have been shareholders and have been good and stayed with the company. So like, to me, I did not see what maybe the articles or the news network's lens is. I'm not going to pretend to say that there isn't maybe something else that goes on, and hopefully we don't have to edit this out but again, it is consistent. Like he did something that now, after reading his book, and knowing him through his book,
right,
that decision looked unbelievably consistent with everything else. To the naked eye, or to not knowing him, you see that decision and you instantaneously maybe zero in on, oh, you fired people, and you're going to pad the pocketbooks of your shareholders. Okay, but it is a both and yes, it's always unfortunate when people need to be let go. But unfortunately, that is part of our on page 176. He actually gives you a formula for how you may have to fire someone, right? And yet, in the same token, Joel, like I was completely like I resonated with the paragraph that was in there, because it also is the same formula that we as educators need to use when we need to give tough feedback to a student, or we have to give tough feedback to a colleague, which unfortunately we've all been victim of shying away from. and some people completely avoid it. But he talks about it's painful, but yet if you are honest, you can get through the situations. Because, and again, both and, right? It's there's a concept within emotional intelligence called the velvet hammer, which is a quintessential both and. It's, I'm going to have to make a tough decision, but I can do so with kindness and compassion and with respect, right? And so, and unfortunately, I feel like we've lost some of that. If you look around us, right? Like, and I, not to get too political or anything, but just looking at the racial divide, the Republicans and Democrats, right? I mean, you just look at all of these things going on right now, and you think, how did we get to either or in such a drastic way?
Right.
Like, you're really telling me we're that far apart from each other that we can't have a both and? I mean, like the State of the Union and having people yelling out, you're a liar. And then yet, the realization that we can't and won't accomplish anything unless we work together. And it's like no different than an English department versus a math department versus one school district versus another school district. It's like, how can we find a way to be more aligned with each other and accept each other? And then and this segues into that, the other thing that I want your thoughts on as well, which is when you read Iger's book and he talks about the acquisition of both Marvel and Star Wars. I don't know if you noticed this, but he was super intentional. There were a couple quotes that really, really hit me. One was when he purchased Pixar from Steve Jobs, and it was similar with the others in terms of Marvel and Star Wars. He said, quote, "If we don't protect the culture you've created," that is Pixar, "if we don't protect the culture you've created, we'll be destroying the very thing that makes you valuable." And then a little later, when I think he was talking about Marvel, he said, it does not, because there's trepidation whenever you buy something or you assume something, right? Like you're bringing them in, is that you're going to make them a robot of yourself. And he was like, no, actually, it doesn't. He says, quote, "It does not make sense for us to buy you for what you are and then turn you into something else. Like, it doesn't make sense." And I was just totally taken aback by that, because I think to myself, how many times have we, taken in a new class of students and said, well, I'm going to change them and we're going to make them this? Or how many times does, you think about the other school district in your, the 4 elementary schools, and you're like, each has a different culture. And you're like, well, and that new administrator goes into that from one school to another school and says, oh, I'm going to make it just like that. No, like, there's a reason why that school has its own name, its own mascot, its own. What is it about that place? Yes, every little culture has its room for growth, its room for improvement, but it is what it is, right? Like, it's there. And how do you take that culture and make it unique and special to the people that are there? And too often we go into new situations because of our own insecurity. We wanted to make it in the image of who we are and never, ever embrace where they are.
So this is actually leading into, I'm having another conversation in the very near future with, and I've talked about it before on the podcast. There's a book, When Helping Hurts. And then it's also Kurt Candler. He's got another book coming out. Or he has his book coming out. So you say you want to help. Basically, it's similar sort of, it's on pre-order. I should know the title of it. I'm going to talk to him about it. But basically talking about working with like communities of extreme poverty, right? How do you do that well, right? And rather than coming in and in the book, When Helping Hurts, there's an example, and it's of what if Donald Trump comes in and says, hey, I want to build a swimming pool for a school? And they gave this example. And like the school might be like, you want to give us money for a pool? Sure, we'll build a pool. And like, obviously, and so, they build the pool. And it's like years later, like the pool is like not being taken care of, like it's falling apart, like it's stuff like that. Well, we couldn't afford the maintenance and we actually don't need a pool. We are actually like maybe going to try and like put cement in the pool and put a basketball court on top, but that probably won't work out that way. Like,
right.
Because no one ever went in and said, like, I want to help, but like, you got to get into that community and be like, hey, how can I help you be the best version of this school,
of yourself,
right? Or of the community, right? Or of that school,
sure.
Or of that space, right? And so part of the things of, it's brilliant, both the When Helping Hurts and then Kurt Candler's book, like talking about how
they look forward to reading it.
Yeah, we're pre-order now on Amazon. But when you go into a community and say, we want to partner with you, right? And thinking about, well, what are the assets that exist within this community? What's our perception, like our assessment of what the community actually needs, right? And then how can we leverage some of those assets to fill some of those needs? And then where are the gaps? And now we'll talk about maybe helping with the gaps, right? I was a part of a service trip. They didn't call them mission trips; they call it service trip to Haiti, where a community didn't have water, didn't have safe access to water. They had to go miles in either direction, like had to take a taxi to go get water. And so that place, and so like that was a need, right? And so to fulfill that need, there was someone like, hey, we can get a filter built up at the top of the mountain that'll bring water down the hill, and then people have access to fresh water. And what's the community have the ability to do? They had the labor in order to take the pipe miles down the mountain throughout the entire community, and then to put spigots in place, right? And then then lay out even the schedule of when would people get water at certain places. Transform that community. And it was like, what did the community need? What was the need? And now obviously, kids have time and things and stuff to go to school, and women have time to start businesses.
What if someone had just come in, right, and said, oh, I'm gonna send you hundreds of thousands of gallons of water in jugs, right?
In jugs. Like, and then they're like, well, what are we going to do with all these jugs? And like, we got plastic blowing up all over the place, and like, and all these sorts of things. There's not a sustainable solution.
That ends. Exactly. Okay. So there's the point. That sustainability, right? And I think that from the naked eye or from an outside perspective, even when, and you and I are both Star Wars geeks, so I was so petrified, like that they would Disneyfy our Star Wars, and to some degree, maybe they have a little bit, but it's still, if when you watch The Mandalorian,
watch Andor, holy cow,
once you watch Andor, you're like, I am taken back to a moment in the early 80s when I was literally glued watching Luke Skywalker figure out that who his father really was, right? And so to his point, he's saying, like, yes, there is something to be said about financially and competitively by bringing these brands within our own umbrella. But there's even more to be said about, and this is what's probably not talked about enough that I would love to hear his perspective on. I'm pretty certain he leads Pixar differently than he leads Marvel, and how he leads Star Wars. And that right there is the challenge we face as educators on a daily, if not hourly basis, which is, can we be versatile enough to have a classroom of people, AKA a business, with all of these different entities, and teach and train both and honor who they are, and even learn from them,
Yeah.
Like that's been the greatest thing that I've taken from my transitions over these last couple of years is a fresher perspective on almost being less of a know-it-all and more of a tour guide. And a good tour guide, he plays off of people, the Jungle Cruise. Like you may have some bad dad jokes, right? But if no one's laughing at them, you got to kind of get your shtick going in a different direction. And no tour is ever the same. And so I can't help but think today how much different I am interacting with people, having gone through some experiences now and acknowledge many failures, realizing that if I keep on this pursuit of being better than I was yesterday for the greater good, that every day I get a chance to not just, in my case, interview someone, get them ready to get a new job, think about that transition through their life, but also take a piece of them with me, right? And listen to them and hear them, because it's in digging deeper underneath that. That's where we then become even a better guide for them, because we've established this connection that grows even that may even transcend ourselves. I may have gotten a little too deep there, but
no. I was going to.
I hope that makes some sense both to you and to the people listening to this, which is, we so often, again, and back to the quote that you remembered that I said, which I did text you, which I think I'll remember now, which is, if we could better look through their lens, right, we will speak a language that they'll better understand, and that will make a deeper impact in them than just speaking at them at wherever we're at.
Well, and then that leads to, I think, and you talked about a little bit, like, this pursuit of perfection, this, dealing with different cultures and different entities within, if we're talking about within a school, within a district, within each individual classroom, and that means there's risk there, right? Because you're not trying to conform and put everything. And so, that I think that's one thing that Iger realized, that you're gonna make mistakes, right? You're gonna make mistakes, and you got to, especially in being a creative or a human endeavor like storytelling, or there's going to be times when you're going to have something and it doesn't quite, launch the way you'd want it to, or do everything. So like some of the ideas about risk taking, like you said. So I got some quotes here. Like, one is just granting permission to fail, right? And like, and having that sort of perspective of like, you're going to make mistakes on the way to that better classroom, that better teaching. That's just making sure that teachers understand that.
And piggybacking off that is not just for yourself, but the grace to forgive another's failure, which unfortunately a lot of times in education, like, we will be slightly judgmental, I would say, upon someone's not turning in homework or not paying attention, or, you go down the laundry list of those behavioral type issues that we deal with, and as opposed to giving them grace. I'm not saying that we need to have a free for all. That's not what I'm saying, but better grace for their own risk taking. My daughter is at a small college in Ohio, and she, they had a test, and of course we always believe our daughters, but I'm also realistic, and I don't think I've ever not taken the teacher's side in 90% of the cases. But in this one case, I heard her say, like, Dad, every one of us failed this test, and none of us could understand where some of these questions came from. And I think to myself, like, how did that happen? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah.
And I don't know for sure, but, and then is that professor being reflective enough to ask themselves, is it really them or was it me?
Yeah. That's another quote. Take responsibility when you screw up.
Amen.
Yeah. Well, and then, and so that's, I've talked about this as a behavior in my class, remaining open-handed, right? So open-handed being like, if everyone's not doing really well on this thing, how well am I doing at teaching or creating an environment for them to be successful? And so, and that,
and what good in some ways does this do for you to keep going down that syllabus of yours, right? When you know that there's a fork in the road right now and an inflection point, and you're like, boy, they're not getting it. How do I slow this down a little bit? Because who knows, if you slow down, you may be able to speed up later on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And thinking about, that environment for, you said be in the business of creating possibilities for greatness. And thinking about, and again, it doesn't mean that it's always going to be great, but you create that environment. And so like thinking about, I always go back to like, students, and I'm dealing with, teaching teachers how to teach math. And so like sometimes there's a previous relationship with mathematics that might not be that great. Hopefully it is, but might not be. And oftentimes it's not. And so thinking about, I want them to be in a place where their relationship with math is, if they, don't do too well in an assessment or, might make a mistake on something, that those are opportunities for growth, not a sign that, me and math aren't hanging out anymore. Like, no, we want everyone to engage with being and see themselves as doers of mathematics. And so how do you make a safe place where that can occur? And again, he's talking about like creating environments, right? And so like, he's talking about those environments for Marvel and Star Wars and things to happen. Like he's creating these environments for them to be successful, but still providing them with the support and feedback in order to refine what they're doing.
So what if we go back to that, one of the first things we talked about today, which was that relationship between Rune Arledge and Iger, and in that moment when they met, and what if we changed? So listen to the difference between this. Some days I feel like it's tough just to keep going, or some days I feel like it's tough just keeping my head above water. Well, it looks like you're going to need to get a longer snorkel. Or what if he said, some days I feel like it's tough to just keep my head above water. Well, I've got a longer snorkel for you.
Yeah. You still got to swim, but
you still got to do it.
Yeah.
You still got to do it. But wait a minute. Like, okay, like I heard, but I got a snorkel that's a little bit longer. Like, I'll give it to you. Right? Like, what if we thought that way more often about, like being really solution oriented? Right. How often do we get upset at our colleagues or each other? Or how many times did I get mad at my mom or dad when they would say like, well, just get it done. Like, or a teacher that is like, you're just going to have to figure it out. It's like, if I could, I wouldn't be frustrated. And if that were the case, I would, like, I am drowning. I don't give, do you, and because you possess the knowledge, you're the tour guide, you're the expert, there's got to be another way. Give them a longer snorkel.
Yeah.
Just find a way to tweak it. You've got those snorkels sitting in your offices. You got them in your classrooms, your offices, in your relationships, in business and in life. You've got them. What if you just said, as opposed to, well, you're, out of luck. You better find a longer snorkel.
Yeah. Because not like you're saying, I'm going to carry you out of this. Stay with the metaphor. I'm not going to carry you out of this pool like Tom Hanks and Splash. I'm not going to just pick you up and take you out. Still got to do the work, but now I'm providing that. And again, going back to that good helping, right, is like, knowing, building that relationship, providing the thing that's needed in those spaces. So if it is like some pointed professional development, if it is that, if I'm thinking about, leaning in with a student, like providing that a question, provocative question as opposed to a statement that'll point them towards like, hey, have you thought about, X? And so, and getting that, now they have that, so that they can still own the aha, but I'm, helping them, like you said, with the tour guide, hey, have you looked over here? And like, whoa, look over there. That's amazing. Like,
I know that you see the giraffes over here, but have you looked to the left? Yeah. And lo and behold, here are the rhinos.
That's right. Yeah.
But we get, and
that involves a relationship though, and that's tough. And that's what we need to get to.
And that's and then for me, it gets to one of Iger's more kind of poignant messaging near the end, which is, and I'm drawing a blank, so help me a little bit.
Yeah.
The former chairman was Michael. What was his? Michael Eisner. Okay. Do you remember in the book that moment in time where Michael was leaving for the last time?
Uh-huh.
And I remember myself in a role, we always feel like we're either invincible or that what are they going to do without me type of thing. And I have learned in my career beyond firsthand that the seat stays pretty warm once you walk out. Like that doesn't get very cool, and it sure does not get much dust on it.
Yeah.
Like there is someone that's going to sit in that seat when you're gone. But that the notion that the wrapping yourself both from this is my classroom or my school, to also the realization that there could be someone else teaching fifth grade just like you, and he paints this picture of this really sad moment, and this and yet a realization occurs for probably him, and it did for me, that it is a title and a position and a time frame, and those things don't matter. Like they matter, but they really don't matter. I mean, Joel, I can't even tell you the number of times where I'll be talking with, so many different types of people that are looking for jobs, and you get your, most of my work is in consulting. Like we're bringing in a professional to help, and it's so interesting the approach that the person has relative to the name of the position and how much it pays, right? Like that there are some consultants that honestly, it does not matter to them. Like literally, like they know that they are worth $100 an hour on a consulting fee. But if I come to them and say, hey, I got this thing, it's a really good fit for your skills, but it's only 75, they're like, oh, okay, but there are others that are like, oh, no, I am worth 100, and it needs to have a director title, and it needs to be a manager. Yeah. And then it's like, okay, so you then put more filters in the way of, and those are arbitrary things, because, yes, we want to be compensated for what we're worth, but sometimes altruistically, a school district or a company can only afford X. They're really doing the best they can. And who knows, maybe that experience, while it may be less than, this X might be less than this Y, it could be, you could be the exact person they need. And then what is that fulfilling feeling worth to you? What is that how much is it worth to know that you're loved, appreciated? You could go to school district or company Z and get paid $15,000, $20,000 more, but you're getting treated like whatever.
Yeah.
Like, what would it mean? And we, it's that insecurity of not knowing our own worth that makes us want more worth.
Yeah.
And that's really like, I took a step back, like I had to pivot in my career. I had to go in a completely other direction due to so many things. And there were people like, don't you ever accept a job that's, what do you mean? Like, in order for me to take this, I gotta find a way to move somewhere. And sometimes it's not paid the best.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not perfect. But if I didn't take that step kind of like sideways and down, I would not be where I am speaking with you today in a place that's even better than where I was before.
Yeah.
And, so when you're thinking about advising teachers and working with teachers about how do I negotiate my salary? How do I, it's like, know who you are, know what you're worth, but there's more than a number and a title.
Yeah. Well, and finding fit, right? And finding fit within a place and seeing how that works with, like, you could think about how much headaches like you'd have, and like, and one position, like, hey, if it's in your example, $25 more an hour versus like another one that's like, hey, this is smooth sailing over here, and it really fits the way that you operate. And like, it's like, I mean, for me, that's like there's not even a decision there. It's like easy. Like, I'll take the less to do that.
Yeah.
But I think finding good fit, and like, and then I guess that does go to when I'm thinking about advising, because a lot of folks that I'm seeing are going to get hired to become teachers. And I'm like, remember, you're interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you.
Exactly.
To see, like, how do you fit within the culture of the school, and what are they looking for, and how do they support their folks? And just knowing it's like all positions are not the same. I'm sure you have that conversation every single day. Yeah.
They are. And it's so hard when you're, and for me, like, this is where we circle back to both and. Mm-hmm. Because if it's either I get this salary or I don't do this, or this is my title or I won't, then it becomes limiting. Yeah. And you become,
and you put the limit.
You put the limit on there.
Yeah.
Whereas when I'm working with other contractors who know, like, I used to make X, or I know my talents are worth $100 an hour, but boy, I'm like, I'm not doing anything right now. Like, like I don't have anything. So it's like, well, that's not exactly what I was hoping for, but you know what? There are times where people are like, well, but if I take a job at $70 an hour, what's going to happen the next time? And it's like, maybe it'll be 70 again. Yeah. Maybe it'll be 100, right. Because like at the end of the day, right? Like that one moment in time, it does not really define your value. It defines to that company or that school or whatever what they can afford for this.
Right.
And we can agree or disagree on that amount, but it is a both and that's just something I hope that at the end of, as we're ending our conversation, right? Like, I just hope that if there's one takeaway, right? One true nugget, it does not have to be this way.
Yeah.
It can be. You can work. You can be both underwater and give someone a longer snorkel.
Yeah, absolutely. Gary, this was a pleasure.
Oh, Joel.
So glad to have you on the planet.
So much fun. Oh, I feel like we could talk for hours and hours. So I get, maybe we'll have to do this again sometime.
Yeah. There's a few more books out in the world.
There are.
Talk about, so.
There are. And, so thank you. You've been a both and in my life. You've been both a friend and someone who's pushed me. You've been both someone who's loved me, but also somebody who has not allowed me to feel sorry for myself. You've you've been someone who acknowledged when I was underwater, and you said, well, here is a longer snorkel, and I appreciate you. And I truly am thankful for you.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking about this the other day. So like when we first met, I think we're about 5 years apart in age, something like. And so like when we first met, that's a big gap. Like we're talking about proportions, fractions, whatever. And now, and then now we just get like, as you zoom out of the graph, like that, the difference in those like bar charts or whatever you want to say, like it collapses a little bit, and we're like, but still like both end, like mentor, and then friend at both end.
Yes.
There we go. So we'll end on both ends.
It can work. Both
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you, listeners. And if you're not following me on LinkedIn, I would love to have you do that, because I think that even though that, for the majority of you as educators that are out there, I think that the Wednesday Word and some of the things that we talk about in that we're working with here in the corporate setting are very applicable to what you're doing as teachers and as administrators. And so I'd love to connect with you if you ever are interested, or we can provide some guidance for you.
Thanks, Gary.
You're welcome.
All right, so there it is. It's our conversation with Gary Williams. And he's making these connections throughout that conversation to his new role in the corporate world. And what's cool is like, that's kind of like the original purpose of this podcast, is not to connect teaching to the corporate world, but actually to go the other way, is to talk about all these great books that are written usually from a business perspective, and then thinking about, well, how do they apply to the world of education? And so Gary has lived in both those worlds, so it's great to have his insight on that. And so even to think more about, some other learnings that I had, some things that, because what's cool in the book, if you go in the back, like Bob Iger is basically, or in the book, they basically isolated all like the, almost like quotes that you might use, like you put it over an infographic, like of a, like the like a cliff with like a sunset happening, and then you put like one of these quotes from Bob Iger on there, and so at the end, and so it's kind of like a condensed version of the book without all the stories and anecdotes built into it. But some things that I wanted to share also before we ended the podcast was some practices that I kind of got from that, and some things that we just didn't get through in the episode, which jammed full, but I still wanted to make sure we got to these. So one, like practices I want to take forward again from lessons here. So, within the book, Bob Iger talks about like the Walt Disney, like Disney Plus, right? And moving into an app, into the streaming world. And basically like that was a big risk, because he's like taking away funds from, the physical media and the movie theaters and stuff, and saying, hey, you should stream, which is a different thing that's not established yet. And so, basically taking money from yourself. And so I had to create a complete different, like compensation structure, because it couldn't be tied to revenue, because he's basically saying like, we're going to lose money here. And so he had to innovate. And he couldn't be scared with that. And so that was something that was kind of stood out in thinking about teaching. Like, for example, one of the big things right now people are dealing with is Chat GPT, this like AI that can like write papers, and people are like, oh my gosh, the machines can write papers. What are we going to do? Well, if everything you're doing, the only means of assessment is of whether or not someone's learned something is through paper writing, well, then you might have some issues with assessment. Like, you don't have issues with AI. You have issues with how you're gaining, like, what your students are understanding, right? And so there's lots of people out there that are talking about how to use Chat GPT as a tool, right? And not be scared of it. It kind of reminds me of, like, I did a podcast on Sound City, where Sound City was the music studio where a lot of the great albums that Fleetwood Mac, Rumors, Nirvana, Nevermind, like Rage Against the Machine, all these different bands like recorded there. And it was an analog recording studio. So when digital shows up, like people getting scared, and like Sound City went out of business. Well, some folks like Trent Reznor, he's like, the technology, like digital recording, is not something to be scared of. It's actually just a tool to use to make other cool music. And so not being scared of the technology, not being scared of innovation, but you need to innovate. And so one of the quotes that are in this in the book that I wanted to make sure to get at, it was, now more than ever, innovate or die. There can be no innovation if you operate out of a fear of the new. And so some people are afraid of like Chat GPT, or some people are afraid of online education. Some people are afraid. Some people were afraid of whiteboards, but I don't know if anyone was really afraid of whiteboards. But anyway, just that's something that stuck out to me. Like, hey, how do you use these tools, right? Don't be afraid of them. Just think of how do you use them to make a better learning experience. Or else too, like he also had, there's some like Bob Iger was leading through, some pretty rough times in the economy and things like that, where people are like, hey, I'm not going to Disney World, or we can cut out some entertainment budgets and stuff like that. And so thinking about how do people react during doom and gloom times, which right now in education, there is some doom and gloom, right? That is happening. Like there's the attack on public education. There's a teacher shortage. But to say like, you know what, there's some opportunities to innovate. There's some opportunities to think about how do we make what we're doing better, right? And so to have an optimist, because like just to sit there and bury your head in the sand and say, woe is me, is not going to do anything. But to have that optimism, and I really like that. So, like he has a quote, pessimism leads to paranoia, which leads to defensiveness, which leads to risk aversion. It means you're not going to try something. You're not going to try stuff. And also too, he said like being pessimistic is ruinous to morale. No one wants to follow a pessimist. That's true. Like, where are you going to follow them? Again, you put your head in the sand. And finally, and Gary kind of touched on this a little bit too, in talking about, what do you do when you're gone? Like what happens when you're gone? Talking about the transition of Michael Eisner out of the company, or even too, Bob Iger's own, like when he left, retired for the first time. And there's a quote here: good leadership isn't about being indispensable. It's about helping others be prepared to step into your shoes, giving them access to your own decision-making, identifying the skills they need to develop, and helping them improve, and sometimes being honest with them about why they're not ready for the next step up. So when I think about that, I think about legacy. I think about, what happens after you're gone, right? Is there some way that people are going to, keep on with the things that you've put into place, or do they just disappear when you're gone, right? And so that's what I see as legacy. That's what I also see as like Carino, which Jeff Duncan Andrade talks about in one of his works, which is when you like do professional development at a school. When you stop doing the professional development at a school, does anything remain? What remains? And you want things to remain, because if you're not being caring, you're not being loving, right? You're just being actually kind of selfish, that I'm taking everything with me when I go. But does something stay there and has some lasting effects? And so that's what you want as a teacher, right? That your students are carrying on some things, some practices. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's about your subject area, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's about the way you approach life. Maybe it's about how you care for others in the classroom, and there's something to be learned there. And so thinking about also too, and this might go back to the teachings, like when I talk to teachers or when I see teachers, I want them to be thinking like, how can they convince others that to do this job, right? That to find their replacement, okay? Because it's not doing anyone any favors to just bash the profession. That's what I can't stand. But to say, hey, this is something that needs to be done, and yes, there needs to be increases in compensation, and teachers need to have less things put upon them, because they're being overworked and whatnot. But how do we help build up this profession, right? And so thinking about that and doing it, maybe even if it's not just for yourself, but it's for the person that follows you, right? And so that's where I think about with legacy. All right, so that's enough. So we're gonna put some links in the show notes. We'll put the link to Bookshop. We'll put the link to Gary's LinkedIn page, so you can find him there. He's doing some cool stuff with these Word Wednesdays and stuff, so you get a little bit of extra dose of Gary if you're looking for that. But yeah, thank you as always for listening to this episode. Again, show notes can be found at amazonplanet.com/episode 88. If you're looking for ways to support, you can submit a question, comment, or suggestion to the mailbag by sending an email to joel@amazonplanet.com. You can also subscribe, rate, and review, and share this episode, which will allow more people looking for similar content to find it. As always, you can follow at Amazon Planet on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, or like the Amazon Planet Facebook page. In addition, you can subscribe to the Amazon Planet download, which came out for the first time in a while at the beginning of February. So if you want to gain access to the Amazon Planet download, you can look for the join the email list button at AmazonPlanet.com. A bunch of them all over the place. Finally, check out the Amazon Planet store, Amazon Planet Bookshop. Links are in the footer at AmazonPlanet.com, where your purchases support the production costs of the podcast. Thank you for spending time on Amazon Planet. Thanks to Gary Williams for sharing his expertise. Thanks to Matt Mifflin for the music in this episode. Finally, thank you to all of you out there learning to teach better and be the good in the world by investing in the lives of others. This world is a better place because you have decided to use the gifts you have been given to serve others. Thank you for all that you do. Peace.